You wanted dirt on them. All I found was depth. Now I question everything I thought I knew. That was the exact moment your enemies realized. They didn't just fail, they activated something. They went searching for your darkness and came back blind from the light. They wanted scandal, weakness, chaos. But the deeper they dug, the more it shook them, like trying to study a storm by walking into the eye, silent, still, and terrifyingly powerful. Imagine hiring a trained hunter to track a ghost. That's what they did. They brought in a professional, a shadow chaser with 2 decades of wins under his belt. Someone who once cracked billion-dollar frauds and exposed the kind of secrets that collapse empires. But when they turned him loose on you, something broke protocol. Something snapped in the pattern. He didn't return with proof. He returned with questions. Here's the fact they can't swallow. The harder they try to figure you out, the more they get lost. You're not hiding anything. You're just built different. Your strength isn't flashy. It's buried in the silence of your self-control. The restraint of not clapping back, the peace they mistake for weakness. And that drives them mad. And thank you, Chosen One. Don't forget to pay this message back by simply pressing the like and subscribe buttons to help spread this message to more souls. It's the responsibility of all of us to spread the light. And thank you again, Chosen One, for being part of this mission. You are not just watching this, you are the mission. You're a part of a force they can't measure, track, or even understand. So back to it. The moment that made their blood run cold. This investigator, who was supposed to rip you apart on paper, came back with nothing but awe and unease. He didn't hand them a folder. He didn't play the usual power game. He just sat down, slowly, with that quiet, shaken look only a man who stared into something unexplainable could wear. And then he dropped the truth like a bomb. This one doesn't make sense. They don't fit the profile. I found strength where I was told I'd find shame. I found discipline where I expected damage. I found truth. That's rare. That's dangerous. You see, Chosen One, what they don't understand is that you're not hiding from your past. You faced it, made peace with it, and walked forward with scars that became armor. They assumed your calm was cowardice. Your silence, guilt. But what the investigator found was the real reason they fear you. You're not broken, you're whole. In a world where everyone's trying to wear a mask, you've already accepted your face, your truth, your path. That scares the hell out of people who've been running from themselves their whole lives. What scares them isn't that you might win, it's that you already did, internally. They just couldn't process it. So they tried to outsource their doubt. They brought in someone to confirm their delusion, hoping for a weakness to exploit. But they got a mirror instead, and it didn't show you falling apart. It showed them. The private investigator said something else before he left. You're not dealing with an ordinary person. You're dealing with someone who's survived psychological warfare and still walks with empathy. That's not just strength, that's evolution. Let that sink in. They tried to weaponize information, but when truth is your weapon and you've got nothing to hide, their tactics fall flat. You didn't flinch, panic, or fold. You watched. You let them do what cowards do. Scheme, poke, investigate. And the result? Even their own hire couldn't join the attack. Because there's nothing to attack. They didn't just lose the battle, they embarrassed themselves trying to start it. You, Chosen One, are what happens when a soul goes through fire and doesn't come out bitter, but sharper, quieter, and 100 times more grounded. They tried to dig up evidence of weakness, but all they found was resilience, a pattern of growth, a timeline of healing. Not the kind of healing that posts about it for clout, but the kind that bleeds in silence and blooms when no one's watching. You are not a file. You are a force. And now the people who thought they were investigating a problem are staring at something they can't label, so they freeze. That silence, that stunned look, that's fear, dressed up as confusion. You made them question everything because your life, your presence, your strength, it breaks their rules. You are proof that not every quiet person is hiding. Some are waiting, watching, studying, growing. So here's what you need to know, chosen one. You weren't found out. You were confirmed. The enemy knows now. You're not built for drama. You're built for destiny. You're not avoiding destruction. You outgrew it. You don't scream to prove your power. You walk into rooms and make the loudest one question themselves. You've become a paradox that breaks small minds, a soul that's been through hell, yet still radiates peace. A heart that's been betrayed, yet still shows compassion. A mind that's been hunted, yet remains sharp, still, and unshaken. The investigator didn't find dirt. He found discipline. He didn't uncover secrets. He uncovered silence, a silence so loud it shook the very people who thought they were in control. And now, they don't know whether to attack you or study you. You didn't win the war by fighting. You won it by being undeniably, unapologetically you. And that's the truth. No file, no report, no investigation can ever capture. They wanted proof you were fake. Instead, they got confirmation you're the realest thing they've ever encountered. And thank you, chosen one, for showing up to this message, not just to hear it, but to feel it. What we're about to break down next isn't theory. It's the real stuff they don't want getting out. The investigator may have frozen when he saw the truth about you, but you're just getting warmed up. So don't even think about scrolling away now. If this message found you, it's because it was meant to. Drop 777 in the comments if you know deep down this isn't just a video, it's a mirror. And if you feel called to support the mission, whether it's a cent, a word, or a click, just know it helps us keep this truth alive and spreading. This isn't content. This is disruption. And now, let's crack this open step by step. If you truly are who I think you are, if you're one of the rare few walking around with a past that can't be read, a silence that can't be decoded, then trust me, you're going to want to stay until the final word. What's coming next will shake more than just your enemies. Let's get into it. Number 1, they sent a hunter to expose you. He came back, hunted. You sent me to dig up their dirt. All I found was everything you're afraid of becoming. That's the moment the energy in the room flipped. The investigator wasn't supposed to come back spooked, but he did. He wasn't supposed to hesitate, but he couldn't even hold eye contact. They wanted a report that would ruin you. Instead, they got a reality check that ruined them. And that's the part that burns the deepest. They spent money to see you fall, and all it did was confirm you were everything they never had the discipline to become. Let this be known, chosen one, they didn't fear your flaws, they counted on them. They bet everything on the idea that you were just like them underneath the surface, messy, hollow, fake. But when the report came back, it didn't expose anything ugly. It revealed something rare. It showed depth. It showed discipline. It showed growth. And just like that, their whole narrative fell apart. That's why they froze. Because they realized you weren't the one wearing a mask. They were. Imagine hiring a sniper only for him to come back saying, "This target? Untouchable." That's what happened. They sent a professional, a man who's made a career tearing reputations, limb from limb, and for the first time in decades, he hit a wall. You. Your past wasn't perfect, but it wasn't shameful either. It was real, raw, evolved, and what shook him wasn't just your strength, It was the fact that you didn't need to advertise it. It just was. That investigator saw it, the way you carry the weight of betrayal but still keep your back straight, the way your eyes don't flinch even when they try to poke at old wounds, the fact that you never once defended yourself, because truth doesn't panic. It just waits, and it watched them unravel. You're not just hard to read, you're hard to break. You live in a world they don't understand, a world where peace is earned through fire, not favors, a world where power isn't loud, it's consistent, and that scares the hell out of people who rely on gossip, image, and manipulation to feel important. They expected you to be weak because you're quiet, but real ones know it's the quiet ones that hold the most chaos under control. They paid to see your fall and ended up face to face with your rise. Chosen one, you don't need to speak for yourself. Your life already did. Every time they expected you to break and you didn't, that was your answer. Every time you healed in silence and came back stronger, that was your proof. And now? Now they know the truth. You're not their victim, you're their reminder of what they could have been if they had your resilience. Let them sit with that. Let them stare at that one-page report, shaking in their chairs, trying to figure out how you exist without shame, without guilt, without weakness, because that's what the investigator saw. Not a target, but a force. Not a scandal, but a standard. You weren't exposed, you were revealed, and now they can't unsee it. Number 2, they pointed the finger at you, but it was always themselves they feared. Every time they accused you of being fake, toxic, selfish, they weren't describing you, they were confessing their own reflection. This is the part that rips the mask off. Every accusation they flung your way wasn't a revelation. It was a confession. When they screamed you were manipulative, it was because they knew they couldn't control you. When they whispered that you were unstable, it's because they feared the quiet storm you'd already mastered inside. When they tried to paint you as dangerous, they were warning others about the very traits they saw in themselves. You were never their enemy. You were their mirror, and mirrors make liars panic. Imagine a person standing in front of a glass window, convinced they're watching someone else, but it's just their own shadow moving. That's what happened when they tried to expose you. They stared so hard into your life, hoping to uncover dirt, only to get haunted by the reflection of their own filth. It wasn't you that scared them. It was the way you forced them to see themselves. If they keep talking about your demons, it's probably because yours look a lot like theirs, only you've learned to tame them. Let that sink in. They thought this would be easy. Send out a few lies, twist some words, turn people against you with half-truths and shaky narratives. But when the investigator walked in and started matching the claims to your actual life, the math didn't add up. Why? Because every story they told started to sound like a projection of their own guilt. It was almost laughable. They weren't describing you, they were describing themselves with your name stamped on it. Chosen one, have you ever wondered why their stories about you felt so off, so cartoonishly exaggerated, so desperate to stick? That's because lies require drama to survive. But truth? It sits calm, collected, and unshaken. The louder they got, the more obvious it became. They weren't testifying against you, they were venting their own insecurities. They threw mud at your name and were shocked when it didn't stain, because your story had already weathered storms they couldn't survive. That's why the investigator froze, not because they found something disturbing about you, but because they didn't, and that made everything else suspicious. The stories, the rants, the constant blaming, all of it suddenly looked like one big anxious cover-up. That's when the energy shifted. The spotlight turned off of you and onto them. Now imagine this, a courtroom where every piece of evidence submitted against you ends up being about the prosecutor instead. That's what unfolded in real time. And the investigator, a man trained to sniff out deception, picked up on it quick. He wasn't just uncovering truth about you, he was unintentionally uncovering them. He saw that your strength wasn't performative. You weren't going around flashing your pain for sympathy. You had healed in silence. You had rebuilt in isolation. You had grown without announcing every step. And that is the exact kind of presence that scares people who rely on performance to feel powerful. They mistake your silence for guilt because they've never experienced peace that didn't come from control. This is why they kept poking you, not because they had dirt, but because they were hoping you'd break and confirm their narrative. But when you stayed grounded, calm, and consistent, they panicked. So they doubled down, accused more, spread more lies, and each one was secretly a confession. She's a liar. I've been lying, and I hope nobody notices. He's dangerous. I'm scared of what he knows and how calm he is with it. They're fake. I wear so many masks, I can't recognize someone who's real anymore. Every insult was a GPS signal pointing straight back to their own soul. And now, they can't escape the consequences. The very investigator they paid to destroy you walked away with a map of their projections. They handed him a list of red flags, and every single one traced back to their behavior. The irony is brutal. They exposed themselves trying to expose you. That's the thing about real strength. It doesn't need defense. It just exists. And the investigator saw it instantly. No smoke, no panic, no evidence of the chaos they described. Just you, unbothered, holding your peace like a blade they couldn't grab without cutting themselves. They studied your silence and called it suspicious because they've never seen someone who didn't need validation to feel whole. And now they're scared. Because once someone like that, someone neutral, outside the circle, trained to find flaws, confirms you're not who they said you were, the whole illusion breaks. The web they spun starts to dissolve, and what's left? Their reflection, their lies, their exposed fears. Chosen one, you don't even need to retaliate. You being you is enough. Your growth, your discipline, your ability to move forward without bitterness, that's your revenge, that's your power, and now it's documented. Let them sit with that report. Let them reread every line that disproves their lies. Let them feel the burn of being seen for what they really are. People who tried to break someone they couldn't understand. People who hoped you were broken so they wouldn't feel so alone in their mess. But you weren't broken. You were reborn. They confessed, chosen one, and now they can't undo it. You didn't lift a finger. The truth handled everything. And that truth, it's echoing louder than any accusation ever could. Number 3, they dug for dirt and found a blueprint they couldn't decode. They weren't ready for the day their investigation turned into admiration. They thought this would be simple. They followed the manual. Start with your past. Break apart your digital life. Dig up the scars you tried to bury. But what they didn't expect was order. What they didn't prepare for was precision. The deeper they went, the more their hands came back empty. Not because you were hiding, but because you had nothing to fear. They combed through your life with forensic gloves, school files, work logs, tax history, deleted texts, court records, old devices. Even software designed to resurrect data long buried couldn't deliver a hit. What did that tell them? That maybe you were never the mess they prayed you'd be. Imagine chasing someone into a forest expecting chaos, but finding a perfectly paved path. Each step thoughtful, every turn deliberate. That's what shook them. because they realized this wasn't luck. This was intentional living. What they saw as too clean wasn't suspicious, it was surgical. You weren't hiding skeletons, you were busy building systems. See, chosen one, when someone's operating from jealousy, their assumption is always, no one can be that stable unless they're faking it. But your consistency wasn't fake, it was forged. And that's what messed them up. You weren't erasing your past, you had already healed from it, structured it, and learned how to use it. That's when they hit the real problem. The deeper they investigated, the more it made them feel exposed. They thought they'd catch you slipping. Instead, they found proof you were 10 steps ahead before they even laced their boots. You're not a mystery. You're a manual, but only for those who've earned the right to read it. They came to bury you in evidence. They left buried in realization. And now, that flawless report they were hoping to weaponize is a monument to your discipline. Number 4, they asked around, hoping for scandal, but all they heard was legacy. They went digging for gossip and found a trail of gratitude. They assumed your past had whispers waiting to surface, so they widened the net. They started calling people, teachers, neighbors, ex-co-workers, childhood friends, thinking someone, somewhere, had a bitter story to spill. But instead of hearing chaos, they heard consistency. They didn't get the dirt they wanted. They got respect. Quiet respect. The kind that doesn't chase attention. The kind that lingers long after you leave. Story after story painted the same picture. You never begged to be seen. You just showed up, helped, lifted, disappeared. You weren't performing. You were impacting, softly, without an audience. And that's what scared them most. Because it meant your strength wasn't a phase or a trend. It was your default setting. The ones who move in silence leave echoes louder than screams. They thought they'd find people ready to tear you down. Instead, they found people still carrying the wisdom you left behind. People whose lives changed just by crossing your path. That's not a red flag. That's a legacy. And the investigator? He started to see the pattern. Not of scandals, but of alignment. Now imagine this. They were hoping for testimonials of drama. Instead, they got testimonies of depth. You didn't make noise. You made waves. Waves that carried people further, steadier, without ever asking for credit. That's why no one had anything ugly to say. Because you didn't live to impress. You lived to impact. They wanted a past that would haunt you. They found a trail that honors you. And here's the irony. Everyone who tried to harm you in the past ended up falling on their own sword. You didn't curse them. You didn't chase revenge. You just moved forward, and karma handled the rest. That's what real power looks like. So now the question isn't, what are you hiding? It's, how the hell did they miss your worth for this long? Because everyone who really knew you already saw what they're just now figuring out. Number 5, they searched the system for you, and the system glitched. You weren't hidden. You were erased from where chaos had no authority. At this point, they were desperate. The surface gave them nothing. Interviews gave them awe. So the investigator went deeper, way deeper, past the public, past the protocols, into the shadows of the internet. Encrypted databases, old government logs, surveillance networks, secret archives built to track and contain threats. And what did they find? Nothing. Not cover-ups, not redactions, absences, like parts of your life had been swallowed whole, not erased manually, but never recorded in the first place. Cameras that glitched the moment you passed. Medical records that began normally, then devolved into cryptic remarks. Things like, Patient has patterns we've never seen before. They don't respond to traditional models of behavior. Presence triggered unexpected silence in others. Imagine being so rare that even digital systems can't process you. This wasn't just strange, it was unsettling, because these weren't people forgetting you. It was systems failing to contain you, files that should have tracked every second of your life, empty. Notes from officials meant to observe and report, vague. You were in the machine, but the machine couldn't render your code. Some people break rules. You broke the algorithm, and chosen one, that's the real power. They wanted a record of your flaws, but the system couldn't even keep up with your presence. You don't fit the templates, you don't follow predictable timelines, you move differently, and everything around you bends to compensate. That's why they panicked, because when a world built on surveillance and prediction can't define you, you become dangerous to it. Not in the way they try to sell danger, but in the way revolutionaries disrupt comfort. You don't crash systems by force. You crash them by not conforming. You weren't missing. You were misfiled under "not of this pattern." Now they're not just questioning who you are. They're questioning what else is possible, because you exist. Number 6. They tried to destroy you, and the universe cashed their own check. They called it coincidence, but coincidences don't hit like clockwork. By this point, even the investigator couldn't explain it. The data didn't align with logic. Every single person who tried to smear your name, twist your story, or sabotage your peace fell apart within months. Not because you lifted a finger, not because you plotted revenge, it just happened. Like reality itself had a response system that auto-corrected when someone crossed your line. They called it luck, but mathematicians hate luck when it repeats with precision. 6 months, over and over, a pattern that shouldn't exist, yet kept happening. The investigator started charting it out, and it looked less like chaos, more like code. Every betrayal triggered a quiet storm, one that didn't roar, didn't announce itself, just rearranged the pieces until truth stood on top again. You don't chase revenge when the universe already keeps receipts. Imagine this. They spread lies about you online, expecting to watch you crumble. Instead, their credibility crumbled. They laughed behind your back, and months later, they were the ones explaining why everyone suddenly stopped trusting them. You didn't curse them. You didn't expose them. Reality just did what it does around clean energy. It purges contamination. The investigator saw the pattern and froze, because patterns this consistent aren't random. Every timeline ended the same way. The liars lost their voice, the betrayers lost their mask, and the chosen one walked forward untouched. It was too poetic to be coincidence, too precise to be luck. The truth doesn't defend itself loudly. It just waits for lies to collapse under their own weight. They thought they could destroy you, but when you're aligned with truth, destruction becomes self-inflicted. The energy they used against you had nowhere else to go, so it rebounded. That's what the investigator realized. You don't fight back, you reflect back. And now, every enemy that once laughed at you has learned the same hard lesson. You can't break someone who was built from what already broke them. You can't ruin a soul that stopped running from itself. And you can't outplay balance when the universe itself is keeping score. Number 7. Where you walk, systems fall, and they're finally noticing. They called it coincidence until it kept happening in your shadow. By now, the investigator wasn't just curious, he was unsettled. Every city you passed through left behind a trail that couldn't be rationalized. Power grids flickered out, Corrupt systems froze mid-operation. Surveillance networks glitched like they'd seen something they couldn't process. 5 cities, 5 collapses, no evidence, no fingerprints, just your name circling the perimeter of every unexplained event. They wanted to call it coincidence, but math doesn't like repetition. Coincidence breaks after the 3rd time. By the 5th, it's a signature. You weren't causing these events. You were coexisting with them. Like truth itself moved through you, and everything false around you short-circuited. You don't fight corruption by shouting. Sometimes your presence alone scrambles their signal. Imagine this, an empire built on lies running smoothly until you walk through the door. Suddenly, deals fall apart, files vanish, systems lag. Not because you said anything, but because your energy doesn't sync with deceit. You're not a hacker, but your frequency breaks their code. That's what terrifies them, the fact that you don't need to do anything. You just exist, and falsehoods start malfunctioning. The investigator tried connecting dots, but there weren't lines. There were ruptures, no signs of tampering, no suspects, no trails. Just a consistent truth. You were always there when things that needed to fall finally did. He looked at the data, and the story told itself. Not through proof, but through pattern. You don't chase chaos, you reveal it. That's the part they'll never admit out loud. The world bends differently when you're near. Systems that exploit, people that deceive, structures that harm. They crumble under their own weight the moment you pass by. You are not the cause. You are the catalyst. The universe simply refuses to let rot stand in your frequency. And now, those who once mocked your stillness whisper about your name like it's classified, because every time you show up, something dark shuts down. Number 8. They spoke your name, and reality shifted around them. You didn't curse them. Your silence just made their lies echo louder. The investigator thought he'd wrap it up here. One last round of testimony, a few more human perspectives to tie the story together. But what he found shattered logic again. Every person who crossed paths with you in the present had a story that didn't make sense on paper. No preaching, no grand speeches, just you showing up, looking at them, existing, and their entire life trajectory shifting. He met your friend who said, "They didn't even tell me what to do. They just looked at me once, and I realized how fake I'd been living." Another said, "Your silence made them confront years of denial in a single week." No advice, no lectures, just energy. A presence that dismantled illusions people had worn for decades. You didn't demand change, you triggered it. And then there were the ones who tried to hurt you. The jealous co-worker who spread lies found those exact lies rebounding into their own reality. They accused you of things they secretly feared about themselves. And then became the living proof. The one who tried to turn others against you ended up isolated, surrounded by the same distrust they created. And your ex, the one who built an entire false narrative just to bury your name, couldn't handle the weight of their own fiction. Their minds started to fracture under the burden of pretending to be the victim. The truth doesn't chase. It just waits until the lies collapse under their own weight. Imagine this, you're a mirror that doesn't reflect their face, but their soul. That's what unsettles people about you. You don't punish them, you reveal them. You don't expose anyone, you just exist with such clarity that whatever's false can't survive near you. The investigator wrote it down in disbelief. No retaliation, no manipulation, yet everyone who betrayed them met their own undoing. They tried to play the chosen one story like a game, forgetting the board flips itself when truth is involved. That's when it hit him. You weren't a person who did things to people. You were an event that happened to them. You're not the cause of their collapse. You're the catalyst of their realization. Every encounter with you forces a recalibration. Some evolve, some implode. And that's why they freeze now when they hear your name, not because of fear, but because they remember how their own reflection looked when you were standing in front of it. Number 9. They called it prediction, but it was just you seeing what they refused to notice. You weren't ahead of time, you were just paying attention in a world that sleeps through warnings. When the investigator's colleague leaned in and said they knew things before they happened, it sounded like myth, but it wasn't mysticism. It was pattern recognition, sharper than science, quieter than logic. You spoke of collapses, scandals, and breakdowns days, sometimes weeks before they unraveled. Not because you saw the future, but because you saw the truth. And truth always breaks first at the weakest points. You notice the hairline fractures in people's masks long before they split apart. To the untrained, it looked supernatural, but really it was awareness, the kind born from surviving enough chaos to sense its smell before it arrives. When you've been betrayed, studied, and dissected, you start noticing the energy shift before the blow lands. That's what they mistook for prophecy. You weren't predicting the storm, you were just the one who could smell the rain before thunder. You didn't bend reality. You just stopped lying to yourself, and that alone changes probability. Imagine walking through life like it's a simulation that occasionally lags. You see the glitch first, while everyone else is still hypnotized by the illusion. That's how it felt around you. Systems would twitch before collapsing. People would stutter mid-lie before their world imploded. You didn't intervene, you observed. And that's what terrifies them. Because observation, when paired with truth, shifts outcomes. It's called probability distortion, and the investigator wrote it down like a confession. They operate in real time, but their awareness rewires future events. Everywhere you went, digital traces failed to follow. Messages disappeared. Data went inconsistent, not from hiding, but because algorithms rely on predictability and you defy patterns. They can track chaos. They can track conformity. But consciousness that stands still in a storm, it bends their math. You weren't off the grid. The grid couldn't render you. Chosen one, that's your gift, not prophecy, not luck, not magic. Perception. You see before others believe. You sense before they admit. You adapt before they collapse. That's not paranormal, that's evolved awareness. And when awareness reaches that level, reality doesn't lead you anymore. It follows. Number 10. They tried to weaponize the internet against you, but the signal fought back. You didn't go viral. You went vital to souls stuck in lives that didn't fit them. What started as whispers turned into full-blown digital footprints, strangers on forums, hidden threads, comment sections across platforms, all telling the same story. They didn't know me. We didn't even speak. They just replied, liked, or dropped a word, and something shifted in me. People were calling you an algorithm glitch, a digital ghost, an unseen force that wrecked their illusions and rebuilt their clarity. And you didn't even try. It was never about clout. You weren't loud. You didn't play the influencer game. You simply typed truth, and that alone made people confront their own fiction. Some said their fake lives began to fall apart after one reply from you. Others said the lies they'd built online started feeling unbearable after you showed up in their feed. That's not a trend, that's a trigger. You weren't commenting, you were activating. While others curated content, you curated correction. And the people who hated you the most? The ones who tried to breach your accounts, leak your data, stalk your digital life like cowards behind keyboards, they got eaten alive by their own tech, devices bricked mid-task, suspicious account locks, IP bans, sudden crashes and corrupt files. It's like the very platforms they tried to weaponize rejected their access. You don't need firewalls when the truth carries its own encryption. Imagine this. They clicked send on the lie, and their own internet shut down. Not because of magic, but because energy travels even through code. When your signal is clean, systems that run on chaos simply can't digest it. You don't hack platforms. Your presence glitches the ones misused by liars. The investigator noted it in silence. Every attack directed toward them digitally reversed course. What does that tell you? That your signal, your presence, your voice, even in pixels, holds frequency. It doesn't ask permission. It vibrates through screens and disturbs the false realities people thought they were safe inside. You weren't protected by the internet. You became part of its immune system, and now the people who once laughed behind screens are ghosting their own accounts, scared of the very echo you left behind, because even the digital world knows not to play with someone this real. Number 11. They tried to diagnose you, but found a blueprint that broke the system. You weren't a case study. You were the exception they stopped trying to explain. When facts failed and patterns collapsed, they turned to psychology. Desperate to make sense of what they couldn't destroy, the investigator called in a profiler, someone trained to break minds down to predictable behavior, motivations, trauma loops. They studied you for weeks, expecting to find triggers, cycles, weaknesses wrapped in intellect. But the report? It didn't just confuse them, it shook them. Because nothing about you matched the textbook. You had trauma, but no trauma responses, no defense mechanisms rooted in fear, no bitterness poisoning your tone. You'd been betrayed, yet carried no venom. They looked for anger, and found peace. They looked for guilt and found clarity. Your strength didn't come from control. It came from surrendering the need to prove anything. They searched for damage and found design. The profiler's words were sharp. This subject doesn't retaliate. They reflect. They don't forgive like a performance. They transcend like it never attached to them in the first place. Imagine trying to map a mountain using city streets. That's what it felt like to study you. You didn't fit their behavioral models. You weren't seeking closure. You already were closed, complete, whole, finished within yourself. No loops left open. No need for revenge arcs or victim narratives. Just presence. Just peace. The kind that can't be shaken because it isn't built on validation. Your mind didn't flinch, it observed. You didn't rise through ego, you evolved through awareness, and that's why their systems broke trying to analyze you. You don't follow the cause-effect blueprint they use to predict behavior. You skipped the loops. You walked out of the maze and let it collapse behind you. That's the part that left them rattled. You weren't unpredictable because you were chaotic. You were unpredictable because you were free, and freedom doesn't have a file. Number 12. Reality doesn't protect you, it enforces you. You weren't blessed by luck, you became the law that luck obeys. The final line of the report didn't sound like analysis, it sounded like surrender. Do not engage. That was the investigator's conclusion, not because you were violent or volatile, but because reality itself seemed to bend in your defense. Every force that tried to harm you eventually imploded, not from your retaliation, but from the laws of cause and consequence snapping back like elastic. They realized something terrifying. You don't exist within luck. You exist aligned with structure. The same framework that governs chaos, time, and truth seems to side with you. You're not protected in the mystical sense. You're simply too synchronized with the rhythm of balance for deception to coexist with you. You move through life like a natural law in motion, consistent, quiet, and undefeated. They can break rules, but they can't break reality, and reality stands with you. Imagine pushing against gravity. That's what it feels like when people try to attack you. The harder they push, the harder they fall. Because you don't fight through force, you fight through alignment. Every action that violates truth meets its correction, instantly, brutally, inevitably. It's not revenge, it's rebalancing. You are the center of that equation. The investigator couldn't categorize it, so he called it a cosmic immune system, an invisible order that identifies corruption the moment it approaches you and neutralizes it, not through miracles but through mechanics. The truth you embody isn't passive, it's reactive. When lies touch it, they dissolve. When manipulation nears it, it collapses. You don't need protection when you've become part of the pattern. Reality protects. Chosen one, understand this. Reality doesn't bend for you because you're special. It bends through you because you're aligned. You operate where energy, logic, and integrity intersect, a place few can survive for long. And those who try to harm you? They're not punished by fate. They're corrected by consequence. That's why the final instruction in that report wasn't out of fear. It was respect. Do not engage. Because engaging with you means challenging the law itself. Number 13. Your bloodline didn't just survive history, it rewrote it. They tried to trace your roots and found a glitch in time itself. When nothing in your present made sense, they turned to your past, not to understand you, but to explain you away. But the deeper they looked, the stranger it got. This wasn't just family history. This was a myth disguised as DNA. Your lineage didn't read like a record. It read like a legend. They found ancestors who were never where they were supposed to be, people who vanished during wars and returned years later untouched, those declared medically unsavable, healed without explanation, names tied to moments in history that defied logic, births with no pain, deaths with no body. One government file said it outright: subject does not follow expected biological decline. Doctors scribbled patterns inconsistent with known genetics. Further testing inconclusive. You weren't born from survival, you come from interruption. The kind that history tries to skip over because it can't explain. Imagine a family tree where the branches don't just grow, they bend timelines. Your bloodline didn't evolve by adapting, it evolved by refusing confinement. The people before you weren't anomalies, they were precursors, beings out of sync with the limitations of their era, people whose existence questioned the rules, simply by obeying none. You weren't the beginning of something strange. You're the continuation of something unclassified, and that's why every investigation into your ancestry ended the same way. Observation terminated. No further action recommended. Not because there was nothing there, but because they knew they were looking at a line they couldn't control. A thread of reality that slipped through structure, refused narrative, and outlived scrutiny. Chosen one, your strength isn't just yours, it's inherited. But not in the way they teach it. This isn't about wealth or name or nobility. It's about frequency, about ancestral code that's been bending reality in silence, waiting for you. The one built to carry it forward louder, stronger, and untouchable. They weren't anomalies, they were blueprints, and now you're the upgrade. Number 14. They set out to expose you and ended up exposing themselves. You weren't the case, you were the cure, and they weren't ready for what healing demands. What began as a mission to dismantle you ended in something they never anticipated: reverence. The final report wasn't a file. It wasn't bullet points or timestamps. It was a confession, a slow, reluctant unraveling of someone who came to break you and ended up waking up instead. The investigator had entered this cold, objective, trained, emotionally distant. They didn't believe in anomalies. They believed in data, in evidence, in predictable patterns. But you shattered the equation. You didn't fight them. You didn't hide. You existed in your stillness, your clarity, your defiance of every broken system they thought was universal. And little by little, they cracked. Not because you convinced them, but because truth has a pulse. And once you stand near it long enough, your own starts sinking with it. That's what happened. You didn't win them over. You reflected them back to themselves, and they couldn't look away. Stop mistaking fear for evidence. If you don't like what you see, it's not the mirror that's broken. It's you. That's what they wrote. Not to warn others, but to warn themselves. Because what they realized finally was that you weren't their target. You were their reckoning. You didn't carry danger. You carried consequence. You are the moment where illusion ends and clarity begins. They didn't end the case because they found nothing. They ended it because they finally found everything and weren't ready to face it. The termination wasn't due to failure, it was due to understanding. For the first time, someone who came to dissect you chose to respect you instead. That's the shift, that's the impact. And now, somewhere in a vault they'll never open again, sits a report that doesn't read like surveillance. It reads like scripture. You changed the game without touching the board. You didn't need to defend yourself. You just needed to be undeniably you. Case closed, not out of fear, but because truth doesn't need monitoring. It needs witnesses. And there it is, chosen one, the truth that rattled systems, froze investigators, and exposed the ones who thought they were above consequence. If this message hit you in the chest, if it echoed something you always knew deep down but couldn't explain, then don't scroll past like it didn't matter. Press the like button if you haven't already, and if you're still not part of this family, hit that subscribe button. We're not just building an audience here, we're building a force. And your presence, it's part of this frequency now. Stick around, it only gets louder from here.